People think we're thinking beings when we're really feeling beings. Emotions beget thoughts, which beget decisions, which beget action. So it's not until we are more consciously active that our thoughts can redirect our feelings.
This is A Joyful Rebellion, the podcast that explores that moment you realize the life and success you worked so hard to create didn't come with all the fulfillment you thought it would. I'm your host, James Walters, and I want you to be the author of your own story. Each week, I connect with people who inspire bold answers to the question, what do I do now to create a life I love? If you're ready to start answering that question for yourself, you're in the right place. So let's start a joyful rebellion.
Whether we know or want to admit it, our emotions are a major driver in day-to-day life. It's easy to walk around unaware of how our feelings influence our behavior, and if we spend our energy fighting or repressing them, we run the risk of missing out on living the life we've always wanted. My guest today is Kim Korte. Kim saw the need to reframe the explanation of how our brains process emotions through our perceptions and experiences. She's written a book called Yucky Yummy Savory Sweet, Understanding the Flavors of Emotions. It's a whole new way to think about our emotions by relating them to something we all know a lot about, and that's food. Stick with us for the next hour, and I bet you'll come out the other side with more tools for your own joyful rebellion. Kim Korte, thank you so much for being here on this Joyful Rebellion today.
My great pleasure.
It's going to be a fun conversation because it's one of those things that people know a little bit about, maybe enough to be dangerous, but you wrote a book about emotions. And I love the title of the book. It's called Yucky Yummy Savory Sweet. You are helping people understand emotions in a way that relates to something that we all can relate to, which is food.
And let's not forget the second title, which is Understanding the Flavors of Emotions, because I think that's what ties it in to emotions.
That's right. That is part of the title. And how did you land on wanting to help people understand emotions in a way that they could relate it back to the flavors they're used to experiencing every day? Where did that epiphany come from?
I read this book, How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain. And why did I read it is really the question, right? And that's because I was on my own journey to try and understand why things happened to me in the way that they did. I had experiences as a child I shouldn't have had. Grew up in a household with an alcoholic mother. She wasn't like this raging, horrible person, but it definitely had an impact. And she died when I had just turned 30 from it. Then I had another very traumatic experience that rocked my faith, which made me question a lot of things. But then I got married, fell in love, thought this was it. This was gonna be the answer to all my emotional woes. I finally found someone who really loves me and will take care of me and protect me. And he left me for someone else, and it was someone who worked for us. So in one fell swoop, I lost my husband. I lost what I thought was a good friend, 2 businesses, and my circle of social interaction, because these 2 businesses and our employees were my everything. I literally laid on the floor of my condo thinking, what am I gonna do? Like, how do I keep this from happening to me again? I realized that I had to make a change, and I started with thoughts, trying to change my thinking, but my thoughts weren't really doing enough for me, trying to work on my thoughts. And then when I read this book, as I mentioned previously, How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain, it came to me like it's changing what comes before the thoughts. And that's what launches our emotions. In our world, we have perceptions, right? We think we see with our eyes, we think we hear with our ears, and they're really just vehicles for bringing in perceptive data. So that perceptive data is the ingredients for our emotions, and our recipes are our prior experiences. So when we're young, we know what a ball is because we're taught that. But we're also taught what is sad is. We're also taught what hunger is. We're taught all of these things, and hunger, sad, angry, thirsty, these are all emotions. These are feelings inside of our body. And that's really what got me into this, was because we have these two kinds of feelings that can also be related to food. If we might be tired because we need to eat, but we might also feel sad because we think we're sad, but we really just need to eat. And being able to distinguish our emotions, but also look at those recipes. What are we cooking? What ingredients are we choosing from all of the perceptive data that's available to us? What is our brain focused on because of those past recipes? And how do we include more ingredients or relook at that situation to say, does this situation call for a hot pepper sauce, or is it really a creme brulee? Does that make sense?
For sure. It almost sounds like you started to really understand making the shift to figure out how the emotions are either serving you or they're not. Because if I made the statement that emotions are information, would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
And then if we take it a little further, that information sometimes can be inaccurate.
Absolutely.
Okay. So it sounds like as soon as we figure that out, then we can really start to understand how we can use them in order to get where we want to be, or to just figure things out, like, am I hungry or am I sad?
Exactly.
When you were in your condo and you had to figure a lot of things out and you read this book, there were some light bulbs going off. There were some aha moments. What was your next step?
To figure it out. If you were to read her book, there's a lot of things in there that, like, I was just like, I don't know what all these things mean. So I think I read that book, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, listened to it.
Wow.
And there's a term inside of it that was very new to me. And I didn't realize how important it is to us. So the reason that we feel or have the ability to feel, it's called interoception. And it's basically how we catch our feelings in our body. All day long, we've got these signals going through. You were talking about data and information. And feelings come in 2 flavors, the kind that tell us that we're hungry or thirsty, and the kind that tell us we're in love or angry or sad. And they use the same body parts. There's this thing that's called a peptide. This neuroscientist, her name is Candace Pert, she came up with the term molecules of emotions. But our brain is predicting all the time what we see, what we hear, and what we feel. And it's using these past experiences to create these predictions. So these neurons send out these peptides to the body, and that's how we know what we're feeling. That's how we know we're hungry. The brain's like, oh, we need more blood sugar. Our stomach's going to growl. But we can ignore those feelings, right? Just like we can ignore the other feelings. And they're all telling us something. Now, whether it's right or not, like you were saying, whether it's accurate, has a lot to do with our ability to question our feelings, to say, wait, that doesn't entirely feel right. Even when we have learned something. So when you look at these recipes that I call them, it's our beliefs. It's what we've learned. It's what we've been taught. It's our experiences in a moment, and it's our memories. These are all the same thing. It's just how the brain stores them and then uses them for future use because it's efficient, right? It's like, okay, so this ball is always going to be a ball in the brain's mind because that's what we learn. And then we learn how to distinguish balls more concretely between a basketball and a baseball. And just like food, not everything's a pepper. We learn there's green peppers and there's really hot peppers. And so it's that distinction. And how do we know that distinction? From sensory input and from what we learn. But a lot of us don't learn that's how our feelings work. So if we can question, like, is that a hot pepper? And we have to taste it to know that pepper is hot or what it's like. And that's having that connection to our feelings and allowing that communication to take place so we can learn to distinguish. Because we've learned to shut them down. My experiences in life, I shut mine down. So when we shut them down, we shut down all of them. Not only the opportunity to feel pain or the more unpleasant feelings, but then we also get tamped down for some of the more pleasant ones. That's why it's so important to understand that these are just feelings. They're information. And we're born to feel emotions, but the emotions that we feel are up to us. And we can take those same ingredients and make something completely different. Or just choose to say, okay, this is what I'm going to keep cooking. And it might be something that someone else gave us to eat before. And that could very well be something very crappy that they just put a bunch of sprinkles on to make us eat it. We always knew there was something distasteful with it, but we still ate it anyway because we were told that's what we eat.
We've all seen examples where on one end of the spectrum, people trust their feelings far too much and they're completely driven by their feelings and maybe not taking the time to think, oh, is that true? Then on the other end, we see a lot of times people are trying to run away from their feelings, whether it's through alcohol or drugs or working too much or whatever they use to compensate to numb those feelings. It sounds like, as with so many things in life, somewhere in the middle is the best place to be. And when you read through that book, you started doing some of the exploration in yourself. How did you start to get to that middle ground where the feelings weren't driving you and you were able to take a second, just take a breath and start to question them? Because so often, and this might take us down a rabbit hole, but so often we're told, trust your feelings, trust your gut, trust your intuition. And then when we're kids, we're like, stop crying, pull yourself together, or whatever it is. So we're getting messages, deny your feelings. We're getting messages, implicitly trust your feelings. How did you figure out the middle ground?
Gosh, I spent so much time outwardly looking. The book was the start, and it led to this exploration of what interoceptive awareness means, this sensory system, because it is a sensory system. That led to consciousness and understanding just, the inner workings of connection, because if we are not connected to ourselves, we're not connected to the rest of the world. And this whole idea of a group consciousness, which I didn't really believe in, but now I understand mechanically how that works. So I would say it's understanding where I was at that point in time and what was comfortable for me, which is why in my book, like if you're thinking to yourself, well, you're connected already, or you had a level of connection. It's really about me looking in to say, okay, well, what is comfortable? What is uncomfortable? And dipping my toe into that feeling aspect. I use food because there's feelings that come with food, right? And if you're afraid of feelings, if you can say, oh, this tastes good, and where do I feel it in my body? Or I just had this experience, where am I noticing it in my body? Or can I just sit there and notice all the different pieces of me, how my nose feels, how my toes feel at this point, and focusing on those points. And I call that a sous chef, where you're just working on one thing. And then you progress to doing more things like, okay, what's going on now when I feel that in my body? And being more aware of what is transpiring. What ingredients am I noticing? Then going a next step and trying to create new recipes from those experiences and saying, okay, I notice this is going on, but there's more to it. So I'm going to change this recipe. I'm not really angered. I'm miffed. I'm not really in love. I'm just really experiencing a deep crush, or I'm feeling basically pretty horny about this person. So distinguishing those different feeling states is what gives us the ability to identify and pivot from emotions. So it's building that level of comfort is really what I did for myself and what I'm trying to help others do. Because I can honestly say people who knew me wouldn't believe this, but I experience love in a much different way. I experience love a lot more deeply and a lot more broadly. And I can distinguish the kinds of love that I feel with a bit more accuracy, and what I need to feel love versus what I used to believe I needed to feel love. When I was with my ex-husband, the feeling of him taking care of me or protecting me seemed like love, but he really wasn't. And so I've come up with this recipe for the different kinds of love so that I can recognize it more readily when someone's providing it to me.
I want to get into all of the different correlations between emotions and food. And I love the fact that you tied those together. Everyone knows their relationship with food, whether it's healthy or not. There's so much there, and every single person has experience with it since day one. I want to read this because I saw this in your information, and I love what you just said a minute ago about the sous chef, how they prepare things, because you relate a lot of what you do to food, but also the different aspects of food. And you said that perceptions are the ingredients, and our memories and experiences are the recipes, how we put those perceptions together. But our brain is actually the chef who selects and produces the recipes that we've provided through our experiences and our perceptions with the ingredients. Talk a little bit about that, and also talk a little bit about what was the aha moment when you said, you know what, I read this book and it explained emotions, it explained these words I'd never heard of, but I'm ready to help other people understand what I learned from it, but in a little more accessible way. When did you say, you know what, I think people would understand this better if I made the correlation between emotions and food?
I just felt it was a comfort thing. I felt that so many people are afraid of emotions or don't understand their emotions. So why not use something that is relatable and consumable and easy to digest, which is pun intended, right? And so we use multiple sensory systems with flavor. Flavor is not a product of taste. We say, oh, we tasted, this tastes good. But flavor is different. Taste uses very specific, sweet, sour, salty, umami, and bitter. But we use our eyes. We use even the sound going on around us. They know that they can influence flavor with certain tones and with certain music. The same is true with our emotions. They're a product of multiple sensory systems. It's what is going on in our outside world and our inside world. And that is what gets put into the memory. So if we have a memory of certain experiences that create the emotion of fear, fear is a very common emotion, right? And it creates fear. So the brain is putting that all together in the memory, right? Like we learned what fear was because we had an experience, and then we keep using it over and over and over again. So we experience what we expect for that very reason, because we're using the past to predict the future. So we're not always living in the present unless we're more consciously aware of it. It's when we step in and say, wait, why am I experiencing fear here? Because when you consciously look at it, you're like, wait, this isn't really anything to be afraid of. Like, why am I afraid? Then you can redo that recipe and give your brain something else. So it can only use what you give it. So why not be more proactive to create the recipes that you want it to use in the future? This is going back to my saying is feelings we're born with. We have that capacity. What we create is up to us.
That is huge, because that is what this podcast is all about. A Joyful Rebellion is about that time when people realize that either the way they've been approaching life, even though maybe they check the boxes of success and they've done all the things their social programming, their family programming has told them to do, and on the outside they objectively look and appear successful, on the inside they don't feel that. They don't feel joy. And then they have to decide, what do I do next? And that's where the rebellion comes in, because sometimes they have to go against what they've always done, what they've always known, and create it for themselves, just like you mentioned, with creating the way you feel. Can we get into some of the emotions that maybe you label as yucky or yummy or savory, and why you gave them those labels in the book? Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's just because we can feel yucky and things can taste yucky. And once again, food is a prediction, flavor is a prediction of the brain too. So if we look at something or we've had something in the past that we thought was yucky, we're going to experience yucky again. You know, that feeling of you just had the most delicious meal and you're like, oh my gosh, this was just so yummy. Like if you just think about that right now, how that feels in your body. If you can't feel that, then that's why you need my book. And then if something is savory, it's kind of deep. It's not sweet. It's like having a delicious steak if you're not a vegetarian. Or
that's what I was thinking of.
Or if you're having an avocado or some beautifully roasted nuts, that's savory, and it's the depth of the flavor, the richness of it. And that's like an experience in life, like maybe the birth of your child. That's a very rich and deep and moving experience, right? And then sweet. I mean, I love my sweets. I was raised with two grandmothers who were always cooking sweets. My grandmother's divinity and homemade fudge was beyond words. But it's that sweetness that you get, that type of a response inside. It's a feeling. And that's why I'm using these words. That's why I'm using food. And the reason I think that I did this is because by nature, who I am, my personality is to take obscure ideas, things that seem disparate, and put them together in a way that makes sense. Even my husband says I do this when I cook. He's like, there's no way that this makes any sense and that this should taste good. He goes, but it's really good. And it's because I don't like to stick always within norms. I like to experiment. I'm very curious. I'm insatiably curious. And I think that's why. And I'm kind of trying to encourage that insatiable curiosity because it's fear that stops us. Fear is the control by others. Fear is more times than not imagined. Even in the dictionary, it says fear is real or imagined. And also, fear is a control. Like I said, it is a control mechanism by others to keep us from thinking because it really pushes out our cognitive capabilities. Where if we say, okay, I'm going to be a little bit more cautious, instead of being ruled by fear, I'm going to move more cautiously through life, but take a few more chances emotionally. Then you get that experience of, wait, my fears aren't always right. That leads you to curiosity. So then you're curious in life. And ultimately, that is where you want to be because this is where your blinders aren't on. Today, fear is keeping you very focused. It keeps you focused on the object of fear. Curiosity widens that scope a little bit. Well, being cautious widens the scope, where curiosity makes it wide open.
Yeah, it throws the doors wide open.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's something I love to talk about. So many of the guests I have on, and I've never talked about emotions specifically with anyone on the show. I talk a lot with people who are helping others overcome whatever blocks them. And a lot of times that does come back to some sort of fear. Mm-hmm. And even their clients say, well, no, I'm not afraid of anything. And then once they peel back all the layers, somewhere in their childhood, they were programmed to think a specific way, which they did not connect with any sort of fear, but that's what the root cause was. When it comes to your book and people who have read it, what's some of the feedback that you've gotten from them after explaining emotions, which seem like they'd be really complicated, in a way that people can more quickly understand than other books that have ever been out there? What are some of the stories you've gotten?
It's more been like, wow, this makes it a lot more accessible because it is so relatable. It's just such a different way to look at emotions. I know that people go backwards to look in the past to figure out, like, what's blocking me. And I did my own therapy because of what happened to me in my life. But I try and be more present in the day to say, what are these ingredients? Does it make sense? Because when we have the ability to question the ingredients, then that is helpful, because not everybody wants to go back in time.
Right.
Not everybody wants to look at the past. That's scarier for them than anything, and why they want to keep their feelings tamped down, because they're afraid of what they might find out. They are afraid of what they might see. They don't know how they're going to feel, and they've already tamped down how they feel. So this is why I feel like this book is a bridge. It's a bridge to just getting used to feeling and being okay with feeling without having to look back. I'm saying look in this moment and say, does this really make sense?
Yeah.
And then question your beliefs. Like, you may say to yourself, why do I believe this way? And that may take you back in time, and it may not. You may say, I just don't want to believe this way anymore. I just don't want to feel this way anymore. So when this situation comes around again, it's not going to be X, it's going to be Y. I'm not going to look at this with fear. I'm going to look at this situation as it's just uncomfortable, or it's just dreary, or it's just making me feel, pick an unpleasant emotion, because we have a spectrum of emotions. In fact, in the world of neuroscience and psychology, they have a graph that kind of explains, like, if emotions are pleasant or unpleasant, if they make you excited, or if they are calm, less excitable. I'm trying to think of the name of it, but I use it and I say, does it taste yummy or does it taste bad? Does it make me feel tired, or does it make me feel amped up? So I'm using expressions that we're used to with food and then relate it to emotions, like where that emotion might lie based on how good it tastes, or does it make me a little bit more amped up, or does it make me feel tired and listless? Making that and looking to say, okay, this is the emotion I want to feel. And it's really just giving yourself an emotional education to understand there's more words than the ones that we use. And I talk about that in the book too, how to find other words to describe it, because there's all kinds of tools. We don't need a dictionary. I suggest using this app called Word Hippo, because you could pull up the word and then it will give you different words that might give you less or more intensity.
I really like that, because sometimes just labeling, and I've talked to people about, if you can just label something, it either takes power away from things that are negative, or it gives power to things that are positive. And just putting a label on it, so if you can accurately label an emotion, then it could take some power away from some of those negative emotions. So instead of saying I'm depressed and saying, oh, I'm feeling some melancholy, well, that might be a mind trick, a Jedi mind trick of some sort, but it also might get you thinking about it a little bit more. And that makes me curious, when relating emotions to food, like there are some foods that are really good in small doses. I'm thinking about things like sweets and things that in really large doses could lead to some health issues. Do emotions work that way as well?
I would say yes. I know we label emotions as positive or negative, but I think the emotions themselves are information, and just the outcome is positive or negative. So you can be afraid and have a positive outcome because you turn and ran from a bad situation. You can be in love and keep picking the wrong person because your recipe for love is really bad. and so you keep
a little skewed.
Yeah, you keep picking inappropriate, or you don't understand really what a healthy, tasteful love would be like, because you haven't had the experience of tasting it. So it's the outcomes. To me, it's not the emotion itself. The emotion itself is just a reflection of what we've learned up till now. So if it's not working for us, fear can work for us at times. And fear can be used as a tool. Love can be used as a tool. And love can work for us at times. Does that make sense?
It does. And you got me thinking that I love this food analogy so much because if you are used to in your life, you've always had fast food love, for example, and that's what you're used to, and you're just used to that level of quality of love or food, and then you experience some real homemade, made with care dish of love, and you don't know how to react. You're like, whoa, okay, this is a whole different level. I'm not sure how to react to it. I don't know if I like it. It's very different flavors, but it's not as salty as I'm used to.
Yeah.
But you've got my wheels turning. And I would imagine people who read the book, they start reflecting on the way they feel about things as it relates to food and go in 1,000 different directions of how it applies to their particular situation.
Yeah, one reader who I have a review on Amazon, and he's actually on the back of my book because I loved what he had to say. And he's like, I'm always looking now at my ingredients. And he also was wondering too, the ingredients of other people. You can be in the exact same situation and get different results. And the reason is because everybody's using their own past experiences. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's all that they have. So to have that level of compassion for yourself that you might be getting the ingredients wrong, or you might be so focused that you're missing out on more of what's available to you to create a better emotional dish. The same is true for other people. There's a show called Chopped on the Food Network channel. The 4 chefs are competing to become the Chopped champion, right? They're all given these basket of surprise ingredients and they have to do something, but they also have a kitchen full of other ingredients and they each come up with different recipes. They each have different dishes, even though they all use the same required ingredients, but they're pulling from what's available different things. That's the correlation I like to make with the brain. It is filtering what it uses based on our prior experiences, just like those chefs do. Their culture, what they believe is the best dish, the influences that they've had from other chefs or their parents. And we're doing the same thing all day, every day. And that is why we can be in a room and have 4 different dishes produced, because emotions beget thoughts, which beget decisions, which beget action. So people think we're thinking beings when we're really feeling beings. And so it's not until we are more consciously active that our thoughts can redirect our feelings. This is why in these group settings, when we have all these different thoughts, in this crazy, volatile time in our country, in the United States of America today, we have these crazy divisions. It's because we don't want to understand what are the ingredients of their emotions and see, should we be adding it to ours, or can I talk to them about my ingredients and hopefully open up a dialogue, because we're all cooking with different gas.
We're all cooking in the same kitchen, and we've got to figure out how to not bump into each other. And I wanted to talk about something that helped me through. You described a period of time that was really pivotal for you in your life when you had to, essentially a joyful rebellion was forced on you, but it was still your choice whether it was going to be joyful or whether it was just going to be the next phase. And you turned it into definitely what we consider a joyful rebellion. You went out there, you had personal growth, and now you're helping a lot of other people, which is phenomenal. And I went through something not as dramatic, but similar, where I had a crisis of identity. I had a business, a partner that had a business with, and that was no longer the case. I had to figure out, there were a lot of identity, like I've been this for a decade or more, and now who am I? What am I? What's going on? And I found the philosophy of Stoicism, which deals a lot with emotions. And a lot of people mistakenly think that Stoicism means the elimination of emotions. And really what it's about, it's a philosophy of domesticating your emotions. So instead of you working for them, you create a structure where they work for you. But one of the big philosophies is that everything is perception. And that's one thing you talk about, because if your perception is your ingredients, well, you can't have a recipe without ingredients.
Right.
So perceptions have to be there. And I always relate it back to, let's say there are two different people. There's one person who's going to an outdoor concert. They look at their phone and they see the weather app and it's about to pour down rain. They're going to be upset because in their perception, what they were hoping would happen is they'd go to this concert and really enjoy it. And right down the road is a farmer. His crops are dry and he's only 2 miles away from the concert venue, but he's really excited that it's about to pour down rain, because his perception of what will be good for him is if his crops are successful and he can support his family. So same situation, two different people with two different ways of looking at something that's totally indifferent for them. It's going to rain either way, no matter how you feel about it. Have you talked to people who maybe have a philosophy that you talk to them and you think, okay, that philosophy maybe doesn't take into account certain perceptions or certain emotions that you maybe ought to be aware of or think about a little more? Or have you talked to people who are like, oh, yes, my religious philosophy says this about emotions. Have you gotten any pushback with some of the things that you've tried to share with people?
I wouldn't say pushback. I think that what I am presenting is just so different that people have to take a while to consume it, right?
Okay.
I would say that the one thing that people might be pushing back on me a little bit more is the fact that we are more emotionally driven than thought driven, and that our thoughts are a product of our emotion. Because people don't think about the fact that memories are a combination of perceptive ingredients, right? When you have a memory, you are remembering who was there, what was going on, and how you felt about it.
Did you feel safe? Did you feel fear? Yeah.
So that feeling is because of sensory input. And that's why feelings are more of a driver than thoughts, because our thoughts are derived from all of these memories that the brain uses to produce that thought, and feeling is underlying it. So I would say that is probably the one thing that people want to believe, that it's logic, not emotion, it's logic and thoughts, when actually underlying every single logical decision is a feeling. So I would say that that's one. But most people are just like, wow, this is so different. And they're just trying to consume it. One of the things that's really, really hard for people to comprehend, I think more and more people do, is the fact that because we are living in a world that is created by our brain, the only world we know is inside of us. You and I could be looking at a red apple and we could both agree that it's red, but I don't know that you see the same red that I see, because red is perceived by our brain and then translated to us through vision. And I think that's a harder thing for people to grasp, but knowing that, it gives us that power to recognize that our brain is predicting, and it predicts incorrectly. We get prediction error. If you've ever seen somebody and you're like, hey, look, there's Tom. And then you take a second look and, oh, wait, that's not Tom. It's someone else. There's all kinds of situations and stories I could tell about how to relate that. But the biggest point of that is we need to take a second taste of our emotions. And when we're able to take that second taste, we might see that we've missed some of the flavors, some of the ingredients that are part of this current experience. And that is the quality of a good emotion chef, is one that is making sure before that gets served out to the world, they taste it again. So when you take that moment to take a second taste of your feeling, then you're able to make sure that before you communicate it, that you're more confident, or You could say, I think this is what I'm tasting, and then communicate with someone to say, this is my experience. This is what I'm getting. Is this what you're understanding? And be more aware.
Right. And that's where the real work is, what you just described, because sometimes people don't even want to take the first taste of an emotion. They just look at the plate and say, no, that's not for me. I don't want that. Give me the chicken nuggets and fries. I don't want any veggies. The audience who listens to this program, they may find themselves there sometimes, but they're also in the frame of mind that they want growth for themselves. So maybe they take that first taste and they're like, oh, that stings. You know, I didn't show up in the way I maybe could have, or whatever emotions go along with that. And then if we can discipline ourselves to take that second taste and sit with it for a minute, then decide what has to happen instead of running away from it, instead of just pushing the plate away and say, no, that's not for me. That hits a little too close to home. That stings. I don't like the way that feels. I'm going to avoid it. You avoid it and it keeps coming back up, doesn't it? Till you learn your lesson.
Yeah. That plate keeps getting pushed back in our face because our brain wants us to taste it. And that's the whole thing, is that the more you push it down, it keeps coming back. It's like, hey, I'm trying to tell you something. And you're just like, no, I'm not going to listen. This communication system that we've got, this sensory system that we have, these systems that we have, they are there to communicate to us, to keep us safe, to keep us alive, to inform us of what we want. You were saying, you questioned who you are. Our emotions tell us who we are, what we like, what we don't like, what we want, what we need to move towards, what we need to avoid. And if we're not listening to it, we start to fall off the emotional cliff, because we're not being guided and using our emotions to guide us to who we are. And that's the whole path on earth. If you want to know why we're here, I think it's to learn who we are and to develop and foster what it is we want to be. But you can't find out or even connect to what you want to be or who you are or where you want to go until you connect to your emotions. They're the guidance system.
The first chapter in your book, it's called Opus One, $2 Chuck, and the Wine Snob.
Yeah.
And that's kind of funny because anyone who reads that knows anything about wine, you're like, okay, that's pretty different choices. Tell me about that chapter and how you open up the book with that.
It's the story, a true story, by the way. Back in 2004, it was the final day of 2004, actually. And I was attending a pre-New Year's Eve party. This friend of the host, I call him Bob in this story, but the friend of this host, Dan, who is a great connoisseur of wines, and so was his friend Bob. But Bob was always late, and Bob showed up late as usual. He saw a bottle of Opus One, which is a very expensive, fancy, schmancy wine brand, and he headed straight for it, poured a glass, took a sip, and was like, oh, I love this wine. And we started laughing. And the reason we laughed is because that bottle was empty pretty quick. That was one of the first to go.
Right.
And what Dan did was poured it halfway filled with $2 Chuck, which is the Trader Joe's brand. Back then was $1.99 a bottle. Yeah. You know, Opus One is aged in French oak barrels. Trader Joe's wine is aged in oak chips. So there's a little bit difference in the winemaking, but the point is that he took a sip of this wine thinking it was Opus One, experiencing Opus One, because that's what he expected. He saw a dark red wine. He saw the bottle. He had been hurried because he was late and feeling a little embarrassed because, you know, he's always late. So, you know, walked in, grabbed it, took a taste, and he was wrong. So he took a second taste and he's like, this is an Opus One. And he figured it out on the second taste. So what was the difference? There was no miracle or contra miracle, because that's actually going in the wrong direction. There wasn't anyone to turn good wine into differently made. I'll just say that.
Yeah. Less expensive
wine. Less cultured wine. I don't think the grape selections were as carefully picked with one versus the other. So let's just say that. And his experience was different the second time only because his brain expected that. And that's the experience that he got. So that's why I say, knowing that your brain gives you a lot of the times, not always, but it's leaning into the direction of what you expect based on prior experience, because that's what Bob had. He had had this wine before with Dan. He loves this wine. So he's already passionate about it, right? And so he got what he expected. And he's not the only one. My husband, who's in the wine business, he's had that experience early in his career. Some chef said, here, try this amazing, whatever it was, a Pinot Noir. And everyone was going, oh, this is delicious, delicious. And they're like, oh, you bunch of jackasses. This is cheap crap I got. So it's very common. So I think this gives us that compassion for ourselves and that understanding that we can get it wrong. But it's that second taste that gives us that opportunity to be more clear in our experience, because sometimes our second taste is often more consciously driven if we choose it to be.
It seems like that would fold in nicely with, there's a quote that I see quite a bit that says, don't believe everything you think. And also maybe don't believe everything you feel at first. Yeah. Just really question, even if it's good, and say, hey, was that good? Is this love?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Because remember, I got love wrong.
That happens.
Yeah. But it's either an opportunity to refine the recipe with anything. It's an opportunity to refine the recipe, or you're just going to keep cooking the same thing over and over again. Like I said before, the brain can only use what it's given. If you never had an experience with a rubber ball bouncing and someone handed you a ball, you wouldn't expect it to bounce because you don't have that experience. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, this is bouncing. And now you have it. So that's what I'm saying, is like, we are only as good at predicting as our experiences allow us. This is why I promote becoming an emotion chef and being more proactive in creating the recipes we want to experience versus the ones that have been handed down to us that might not taste good anymore or never tasted good, but we were convinced by someone else that they did.
If you had to give your favorite top 2 or 3 ways to be proactive about creating the emotions that are going to get us where we want to be, how would you suggest somebody go about that? Are there some exercises you promote?
Let's just go to someone who's very shut down and not connected at all. And I kind of alluded to this before, taking bites of food and noticing the ingredients in it, just trying to distinguish flavors. And over time, it gets developed. Notice how it feels after you've eaten it, because we can have yucky food experiences and we can have yucky life experiences. So if it tastes yucky, where in your body are you feeling it? Noticing those things. I often use the example of having 3 tubs of vanilla ice cream in front of you, taking a taste of each one and noticing the difference in the flavors. One might be very rich because it's used a very high quality vanilla, a high quality sugar, a high quality cream, where another one might be a little bit more icy because the quality of the cream and the milk wasn't there, where another one might be really, really vanilla-ish because of the type of vanilla or the quantity that they used. They're all vanilla ice cream, but they're each different. So when you start to notice little differences in how you feel in your body at certain points in time or different flavors, and then start to translate that to how you're feeling in a given moment, then noticing what's going on in that moment that's making you feel this way and where you feel it in your body, then moving through there. If you look up bodily maps of emotions, you will find that they did a study and everybody feels emotions similarly and in the same parts of the body. Like Anger produces a level of heat. You feel it in your stomach. Love has its own kind of trademark in the body. So even though it's love, just like vanilla ice cream, noticing the different ingredients, the different flavor of it so that you can distinguish different situations differently. But basically just to connect to your body, because that sensory system is so important. And they're doing all kinds of work now and developing therapies around developing what's called interoceptive awareness. Because the more connected we are to that communication tool of the brain, the more we are able to connect to ourselves and with others, because now we know how we feel and we can communicate how we feel if we choose. And we can develop those feelings, because feelings are energy. And they just are. Like, we're electric beings and we vibrate, because we're also vibrating. At the core of every atom is vibrating waves. So we can now connect to other people and notice the feelings of other people. Notice the, for lack of a better word, the vibrations coming off of other people. So this might help us to be better at our intuition also, because what is intuition? It's the use of a system to kind of guide us when we don't necessarily have all of the cognition, because we get 40 to 50 of the bits of information the brain gets, while the brain is getting 10 million in a second, and we're getting 40 to 50. That helps us to connect to the stuff that we can't consciously connect to. So this is why it's so important to connect to that sensory system of feeling.
This has been such a fascinating conversation, and I want to thank you for digging in and doing this work. I know you found a direct benefit. You did it for you, and now you're helping a lot of other people. And if someone is listening right now and wants to connect with you, get your book, and learn more about what you do, what's the best way for them to do that?
Amazon is where you can get my book, Yucky Yummy Savory Sweet, Understanding the Flavors of Emotions. And you can connect with me at kimkorte.com. Right now, I am not doing courses or anything like that quite yet. I'm actually transitioning from a corporate type of, I have a consulting business. I'm all about process and procedures, which is why I'm all about process and procedure with emotions. And I mean, hey, our brain is that way. So I'm not doing that quite yet, but I do have a podcast that you can listen to.
Tell us a little bit about your podcast. Is it, you just came out with a podcast?
Yes, it's called Flavors of Emotions.
It's on all the places. So people could get more info on this through the podcast.
Yes. And you can always contact me there too and ask for me to talk on a certain topic. So if you have a question and say, well, this doesn't make sense to me, or how do I do this? Then I'll make it a topic, because if you have a question, probably someone else does too. So I feel like it's such a great communication tool, podcasting in general.
Phenomenal.
Yes, because people are sick of news, and communication was always limited to just what was given to us. Now we can choose more, because we've got podcasts, all these videos, we've got different formats to be able to hear what other people have to say. And I think it's important, because in the end, we're the experts of our lives, and sometimes our expertise can translate to other people.
Absolutely, it can. And you're a great example of that, because like you said earlier in the show, you can take disparate things and bring them together in a way that hasn't been done before. You've done that with your book, and it sounds like you'll be doing that with your podcast, and a lot of people can benefit from that. Everyone you meet knows something that you don't know, so it's good to pay attention. And like you said, with the emotions, keep aware of them, keep questioning, is it real? Kim Korte, thank you for so much wonderful conversation and information today on A Joyful Rebellion.
I can't tell you what a pleasure this was. I loved how our conversation flowed, and thank you so much.
Thanks for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this content and are thinking about ways to share your story or even get more joy out of your life, I have a free ebook that I'd love to share with you. It's called Plotting Your Joyful Rebellion, and I designed it to be a 5-step field guide full of guerrilla warfare tactics to help prepare you to overthrow any of the parts of your life you feel the call to rebel against. Go to ajoyfulrebellion.com and click on the link right there at the top to claim your free copy of the book. Again, that's ajoyfulrebellion.com, or simply hit the link at the top of the show notes. What sort of rebellion are you plotting right now? I'd love to hear about it. Connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or through the website at ajoyfulrebellion.com. Thanks again for listening today, and be sure to stop by next week for another episode full of joyful rebellion.